Full of nerves and anxiety, I was standing at the meeting point at Heathrow Airport. This was such an exciting and buzzing place. From here, people would fly all over the world. I was in London. London! I had just turned 20 years old. I didn't really speak any English. I also hadn't found out just yet that my Dutch, go up and speak to anybody and make new friends, didn't quite align with the English stiff upper lip. I was about to embark on a journey for 6 months, and I learned lots. I learned to drive on the left-hand side of the road, to eat potatoes with the skin on. I enjoyed sweet treats at the English high tea, and I learned to say please and thank you. But my 6 months turned into 26 years. As you can tell, I learned to speak the language. I traveled the length and the breadth of the United Kingdom. I made lots of friends. I funded my own education. I set up businesses, I paid my taxes, and I made lots of mistakes. But when after 26 years I wanted to return to the Netherlands, because my mum was very ill, it turned out it wasn't quite so easy to come back. Sometimes life weaves an intricate web, and it's not quite so easy to disentangle yourself from it. I learned that I needed permission from a judge to move my children from the UK to the Netherlands. On the 23rd of June 2016, I was in the Brighton family court, a quite typically English, tired and grey-looking building where disappointment and misery lives. There was nobody left in the building. We were the only ones there. It was heart-wrenching to sit and wait whilst the judge deliberated. At that point, we were unable to make any decisions about our future. We just sit there and waiting. Just the security guards occasionally would poke their head around the door, look at their watches, wondering why it was taking so long. Our families were trying to phone us. We were just sitting there waiting. And finally, after an exhausting day, we got the news that we'd been hoping for. The judge had given us permission to move back to the Netherlands. On that very same day, the 23rd of June 2016, the British people voted in favour of Brexit by a small majority. They aimed to create that greater division between the EU and the UK. They wanted to sharpen those lines of in and exclusion. The judge gave us the green light to move back to the Netherlands, and Brexit sealed our fate. This is the story of my very personal Brexit. My family crosses borders. Where do we really belong? Soon after we got the judge's decision, our life went into overdrive. We just moved up a gear. We were going to move. And we decided that moving to a new country would be like giving yourself a clean slate. Because don't you acquire a lot of stuff over the years? We said we would either sell, recycle, or give away most of our possessions and have that clean slate. We used the moving boxes, and on the garage floor, we outlined the parameters of the small van that we'd hired. Anything that would fit in the van would come with us, and everything else had to stay behind. So we worked tirelessly until the house was more and more empty and echoey, and the skip outside got fuller and fuller and fuller. until the van was packed and ready to go. Now, this coincided with the last day of term of our children's school. This was notoriously celebrated with a blanket banquet. Anybody involved in the school community would bring a plate of food and a blanket and would enjoy the start of summer. Now, we knew that would be our last time with our friends on that field. The children played and then ceremoniously handed over their school uniforms, because that was no longer needed. And then it was time to go. My husband and our 2 little boys went in the van, and I went in the car with our eldest son. And as we drove off, and I looked in my rear-view mirror, and I saw our friends waving us tearfully goodbye. Just for a moment, I wondered, what are we doing with all our possessions just in these 2 cars? But my eldest son grabbed my arm and he said, "Mom, we're really doing this." And just his excitement about the whole adventure somehow made things okay. This is the story of my very personal Brexit. My family crosses borders. Where do we really belong? We arrived in the Netherlands in the height of summer. Now this was odd for me because I saw very familiar things through unfamiliar eyes. Bikes everywhere. Of course, this was the country with more bikes than inhabitants. And little children playing unsupervised in the street. And Dutch people waving everywhere, because the Dutch are very good at waving. My children would pull me to one side and say, "Mom, he just waved at you. Do you know him? What do you want?" Perhaps slightly overly conditioned by the English reserve. My children started their journey to learning Dutch by initially speaking English with a Dutch accent. Just throw a few ch's in there and you'll join the rest of them. They sounded hilarious and a bit odd. We'd been so worried about the children. How would they settle in? How would they learn the language? By Christmas, all 3 boys were bilingual. The one thing we did pick them up on a regular basis in those early weeks was their use of the word weird. You know what children are like, they name things as they see them, so at times they would say, "Well, that's weird. That's a bit weird." And we said, "Well, not really. Just because you see it for the first time doesn't mean it's weird. It's different. Just because you're unfamiliar with this particular thing doesn't mean it's weird. Not weird, but different." But things were very, very different for us. Now, I help manage change in companies on a day-to-day basis. I understand change, but this transition was on a different scale. How do you reintegrate in a country that no longer feels like your home? How do you come back after 26 years to a country in which everything's changed and I've changed? Now, I see what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, England, the Netherlands, same thing. You're probably also thinking, yeah, but you spoke the language. You ride a bike, surely. You understand that bread, butter, chocolate sprinkles, that's lunch. But you see, in England, I'd always been the Dutch wife. Now I was the one with the English husband. Those first couple of weeks, I was a nervous wreck. I've been so conditioned by the emphasis on health and safety in England that seeing my children cycle off and play in the street was nerve-wracking. And we were that family in a Dutch house, in a Dutch street, watching BBC TV and any other English channels we could get our hands on. And outside was that car with the steering wheel on the side where God did not intend it, as our Dutch friends told it. I now finally, for the first time in my life, possess a Dutch car. And I can tell you that not a week goes by that I don't go out of my house, walk to one side of the car, and think, I've done it again. Then I look around me to see if anybody's seen it, and then I open the door quickly, put my bags in, walk round to the other side. This is the story of my very personal Brexit. In the meantime, the bureaucratic mill had started churning. You have no idea. You need to get all your legal paperwork stamped by the Foreign Office. The originals, not the copies. So you send them off, pay a price for the privilege and wait for them to come back. In the Netherlands, you need to choose schools. Now that's easy in England because they get allocated by postcode. But in the Netherlands, there's many good schools to choose from. And then there is the health insurance in the Netherlands. Well, that's a minefield in its own right. But you can only get health insurance when you have a national insurance number. My children didn't have one. That takes weeks to come through, and nobody knows what to do in the meantime. There's exchange of all sorts of documents, change of driving license, and then there's the immunization program. More or less the same, and not exactly. So we were bombarded with letters of appointments of where our children ought to be. Not a day went by that I didn't think to myself, what must it be like for people who come to this country who don't speak the language? What must it be like if you come to the Netherlands or any other European country and you didn't make that conscious choice? Perhaps you were in fear of your life. It must be so difficult. During our move, we traveled between the UK and the Netherlands an awful lot, and we would go through Calais. And I've seen with my own eyes how people were prepared to risk their life to jump on moving trucks. Where must your mind be if you're able to throw your child over the barbed wire? None of us know each other's personal stories. And as long as the lines of in and exclusion are guarded with suspicion and judgment, as long as we see things as weird and not just different, it is almost impossible to integrate anywhere. Brexit has come to symbolize for me the deepening of those lines between in and exclusion. The desire to create that greater space between the EU and the UK, the island and the mainland, to somehow make Great Britain great again. But after all those years of collaboration and free movement, that's very hard to reverse. Maybe the EU is not all things to all people, but it has ensured a long time of peace and harmony and collaboration. If I had had a vote, I would have voted Remain. And then I left. And looking back now at my life of 26 years in the UK, I have to wonder, did I really belong? Inclusion, exclusion, who decides? Isn't it true that complex issues could be best resolved through collaboration rather than isolation? Isn't it true that some of the big global issues that face us all will be best resolved by the sum of all our experiences? This past year has been all about my personal Brexit. My family, like so many families out there, crosses borders. We don't sit very well on this side of the line, but we also don't sit very well over here. We live on that dividing line. And from here, we have a unique perspective to see and learn the best of multiple cultures. We can really miss the English Sunday roast, but get the ingredients and share it and exchange with our Dutch friends. We don't have to choose to be here or there, identify with this or that. We live on that dividing line. And it's not weird. It's hugely eye-opening, enriching, entertaining, heartwarming, teaching us constantly not to label things. My family crosses borders. We live on this dividing line, proudly, looking to the future and building our tomorrow.